let's go ahead and begin. Good afternoon, Nashville. My name is Joy. I will be your Bates Nursery Boot Camp nerd today. We will be talking about some pollinator-friendly perennials and grasses. We're going to include talking a little bit about birds, too. And I just want to thank you guys for all of the activity and the excitement for this particular subject. I'm going to focus a little bit more on fall blooming and fall season perennials and grasses because this is a big topic and it's hard to talk about everything at once. So I wanted to break it down into sections and seasons. So when creating a pollinator and bird-friendly garden, it's important to plan for every season. Fall is almost upon us, and there are a lot of fall blooming perennials that can offer to the birds and the butterflies that we still have flying around. Some of them are already gone, but we still have a lot that's still here. A lot of summer annuals are still going strong. Brought in, this is an annual salvia. If you can see it, it's kind of stuck over here. That's its bloom. The hummingbirds love this one. Also at my house, I've got pentas and petunias, angelonia, and a lot of different annual salvias, and it brings the hummingbirds and butterflies every day. But on top of that, there's a lot of perennials to choose from as well that we have here at the nursery. We'll start with aster. I'll try not to do too much show and tell, but it helps to see the plant. All right. Last week I showed you some aromatic aster. There's two main kinds that we carry here. It's Radon's Favorite and October Skies. That one, Radon's Favorite gets a little bit bigger, 3x3 typically. October Skies stays a little bit smaller. The bloom, I think, is a little bit lighter, and it's already starting to bloom, which most of them aren't yet in the landscape. But they get really moundy and bushy, and when they're all going at once, it's so pretty. There's also one that's more popular. It's a New England aster called Purple Dome. This one we actually grew ourselves, which is kind of fun. So it's just starting to get going. It's a really nice purple. Great for the butterflies. We also have one. This is not a native. It's Jinde. That's hard to say. But when it blooms, I'll just show you the bloom. The butterflies and bees cannot resist it. They just it's covered until it stops blooming. All right. That's most of the asters. There's also Joe Pye weed is a really good late season bloomer. There's a lot of different kinds. One species is maculatum, and of that species we've got Gateway and Phantom. Gateway typically gets 4 to 5 feet, so if you're going to use that one, use it at the back of your perennial bed. Phantom stays shorter, 2 to 4 feet. And then dubium is another species in the genus of Eupatorium. And that one is not necessarily native to our specific region, but it's really close. Typically it's on the coastal states like Virginia and South Carolina. So it's close enough, and they do well here. And then we also just have Purpureum, which is really a common Joe Pye weed that grows in this area in Tennessee. That one will get quite tall, 4 to 6 feet tall. And keep in mind, with all of the Joe Pye weed, you want to give them a lot of water to get established. And even they're often used in rain gardens for that reason, because they can handle wet feet for a good little part. They can do some drought, but they're going to tell you they're thirsty in times of drought in the summertime. We've also got Salvia Black and Blue, which I feel like is a bit cheating because it acts more like an annual, but we get to treat it like a perennial. It'll come back every year. One thing to keep in mind with Salvia Black and Blue is that you need to give it a lot of space, and then you can see the bloom. It's very similar to the annual salvias that we see here too. Give it a lot of space because it will take over. So don't plant it close in a garden bed where you've got a lot of other things going, because it tends to be a bully. But it's worth having I often just put it in pots every year because it brings the hummingbirds in. They can't resist it. We also have solidago, goldenrod. Right. Those are all starting to bloom at the nursery and also in the landscape. Great for pollinators of all kinds. Typically smaller creatures come and visit this. Beetles hang out on solidago, goldenrod. There's several different kinds of goldenrod. We've got solar cascade, which that species is shorty eye. That is more so native to the Kentucky, Illinois region. But like I said before, just because it's not necessarily from our region doesn't mean it won't do well here. That's just where it typically has been established. We've also got rugosa fireworks, which is the one that I showed you. That one gets about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, same wide, so it makes a nice stand. Also, probably you're going to want to put that towards the back of your perennial beds because it'll get kind of big and out of control. And then we've also got golden fleece. That one is I can't say the species name, but that is a native as well. That one stays a lot smaller, 1 to 1.5 feet by 1 to 1.5 feet. So it's kind of a nice little mound. You can put it closer to the front of your garden bed for that pop of yellow. And then there's Little Lemon, which stays the smallest. That's a hybrid. The parentage is kind of unknown. Or not unknown, I just couldn't find it. But it's a hybrid of a couple different solidagos. And that one stays the smallest at 9 inches tall to maybe 12 to 16 inches. Then we've got sedum, which this one is my particular favorite. It's probably self-explanatory why, but it's called Autumn Joy. There's many other ones that bloom, but when these are definitely, it's autumn for a reason because they start blooming now. It's a favorite. I see mostly honeybees on this, but all kinds of bees are attracted to it, and butterflies. And that one just gets about 2 by 2, not too crazy. One of the easiest perennials to grow. In fact, sometimes if your dog steps on it or knocks it over and it breaks a branch off, just stick that in the ground and that will root and then you'll have more. So don't get upset if it breaks. You can just make more. And then we've got Rudbeckia hirta, which is this one. And they come in all different colors now. It's semi-hardy in our region, but don't be too afraid of that because they'll reseed pretty easily, and then you'll just get a bunch of babies next spring. You can transplant them to other places in your garden. They definitely bloom later than a lot of the other black-eyed Susan type. So it's nice to have those because most of the time, like black-eyed Susans like this are pretty much kind of tired by now. So if you plant your typical Goldsturum with this one, you can kind of play off the seasons that they shine. And then also we've got Vernonia, which I showed last week. This is blooms purple. This particular one is Lettermanii is the species. That one gets 36 inches and is a great for a lot of reasons. It does produce seed for the birds, but it also is a good pollinator for butterflies. This one is also Lettermanii, but iron butterfly. This one gets 2 to 3 feet by 2 to 3 feet. It's a little bit more dense of a habit than this one. This one's like kind of unruly and really truly looks like a weed, but that's kind of the point. This one behaves itself a little bit better. And then also this guy who's sitting in front of us, if you can see, we brought some friends in. He keeps pooping on the table. This is a monarch caterpillar. So this is about the time we have a big stock of these here, but we had to kind of set them aside because we deal with oleander aphids, also called milkweed aphids. But we reached a point where we didn't want to spray anything on them because we were seeing all of the eggs of the monarchs as well as ladybug eggs. So we just kind of set them aside and let nature take its course. And this is most of the oleander aphids are gone now, and so we're just watching all the monarch caterpillars munch down. There's two kind of types that I brought in. We've got, this is incarnata, Asclepias incarnata. There's a couple cultivars within that species. Cinderella, Ice Ballet are two of those. And then this is just Asclepias tuberosa, which is the butterfly weed that blooms the orange. Something interesting to note, typically they say that the caterpillar likes the incarnata leaf a little bit better, but as you can see, I don't think they really care. So it's good to just have both, because the incarnata gets a lot bigger than the tuberosa. Tuberosa stays between 2 and 3 feet, and the incarnata will get a little bit bigger than that. So as for shade perennials this time of year that are offering some blooms and things for pollinators, we've got hosta, which you wouldn't typically think hosta. No, it's not a native, but it really is not an issue here. It's not invasive. And there's some later blooming hostas that offer hummingbirds and butterflies and bees. They really gravitate towards these late blooms in late summer. So that's something to keep in mind too if you've got a lot of shade in your yard, which I do too. Kind of play with how much I can get away with putting things in shade or partial shade. So that's always been a learning process, with, I'm sure, for your yard too. Another shade perennial, this is hardy plumbago. This is definitely something, it's a ground cover, it will spread, so make sure wherever you put it you give it boundaries, or else it will just kind of keep running. It's still, to me, in my mind, worth having in your garden because the swallowtails really like this. Occasionally I'll see hummingbirds on them, but particularly the swallowtails will gravitate towards this bloom. And it does great in dry shade, which is hard for a lot of things to stay happy. Now moving on, we're talking about pollinators, but I also want to stress the need to think about the birds too. They rely on our native habitat and plant material for seeds and also for insects. That's typically more of a spring thing when they're eating the insects and feeding their babies and whatnot. But now we're entering into the nut and seed and berry season for the birds. So some perennials to talk about, mostly grasses. We've got big blue stem, switchgrass, and little blue stem are the three that I'd like to focus on. This one is big blue stem. Also, the genus is called Andropogon. This one's bred to have this kind of blackish purple blade. Gets about 5 feet tall, 2 feet wide. Really makes an impact in the landscape. Grasses are great for offering that natural movement when the wind blows, because fall is definitely a windier time for us. So it offers that. The seeds also are something that the birds eat. And we've also, little blue stem is another one. This is Schizachyrium. Prairie blues is the most common cultivar, but there's a lot of cultivars out there now. Standing Ovation is a really pretty one. Twilight Zone is probably my favorite. Typically, all of these cultivars have about the same size that they get. It's just the color that they turn in the fall ranges a little bit. Sometimes it's more red, sometimes it's more purple, but typically the tuft of the grass stays about 2 by 2, and then the flower heads will go up to like 3-4 feet. They range a little bit in size, but typically that's what you can plan on that size for your garden. And then the last one, Panicum. There's kind of two types. Some Panicums take on more of this reddish burgundy look as we get into fall, which is a really nice color. I like to pair either this Blackhawks or the Shenandoah Panicum with more of a yellow, like coneflower or Rudbeckia, because they really play off each other's colors. And then Totem Pole, this one will get 72 inches, 6 feet. And there's another one similar to this, Northwind, that gets about 5 feet. And then the tallest one that we carry as of now is called Cloud9, and that gets almost 7 feet tall. So that's great as a kind of a natural border if you don't want to plant something so aggressive that's going to get 12 by 12 and block out everything. If you just want a little accent grass, it's good for that because they'll get really tall and they're really pretty. Typically, just one thing to note with grasses, because there's this whole debate when to cut them back. I always cut my grasses back first thing in the spring, right before they push up new growth. They often say most of these grasses, if you were to cut this, there's a little hole in the center. And so when you cut them in the fall, that leaves them more exposed to the water going into those holes. And we don't deal with a lot of snow here, but oftentimes you don't really want to cut perennials back because that's added protection with the snow weight. We don't really have to worry about that too much. Another thing to know about with birds, we've got the seeds from these, but also there's the Rudbeckia hirta creates seeds that the birds eat. Coneflower is another one. Ironweed and Eupatorium all produce seeds that the birds eat later in the season. So when you're cleaning up your garden beds in the next couple weeks, make sure that you're not cutting those back because you want to leave those for the birds, and they'll thank you for it. Earthworms are also an important part of the birds' diet, especially the robins. They love when it rains because all the earthworms come up. So keep that also in mind. One way to feed your earthworms is to give them lots of things to eat. So don't pick up your leaves. Instead, just blow them into your beds. Let the earthworms do the job of breaking them down and pulling that material into the soil. And that improves your garden beds as well. But there will be plenty of earthworms to go around, and the birds will love that you have earthworms that they can eat. We at Bates don't sell bird feeders or bird seed, mostly because we don't have a good space to keep it away from field mice or whatever. But I would love for us to carry that one day. Where you can go get them, your local farmers co-op should have a good selection of both feeders and seed. That's a good way to add extra bird seed for the birds to eat. If you don't have enough in your landscape that you can offer them enough, it's always great to just add a bird feeder as well. And this is a book that I typically use. I love the National Audubon Society has books on birds and butterflies, trees, insects, I think. So it's a good collectors because they're really helpful, because the first part is just, it's got pictures of what you're looking at, and then the second half tells you the details about that bird and what their natural habitat is, what they eat. So they're really helpful. So keep that by as you're watching the birds come and eat at your bird feeder. Last week I talked a little bit about host plants. I've got a few in here that I wanted to stress. Many of the native grasses are all Panicum, Schizachyrium, and Andropogon are host plants for skippers, which is a type of butterfly. So keep that in mind. That's another bonus of having them in your yards. Asclepias, of course, is the host plant for the monarch, as well as the milkweed tussock moth, which is interesting. Not everybody knows that. And then asters, our native asters, are host plants for the saddleback caterpillar moth, which, if you look that up, that's a really cool caterpillar. All right, so I'm almost done, and then we're going to take some questions. I just want to say that spring is typically the time when we think about the pollinators and the bees, but I want to stress that it's important to expand the season that your garden offers as much as possible, so that you can not just reach the early season bees, but the mid-season, late season, and it's good to kind of consider that as you're planning your garden. Diversity within the garden, and that part of that mission is to incorporate a plant material list that will extend to all the seasons. So anyway, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we just got a question. Is it possible to get a second bloom from summer pollinator-friendly plants like bee balm, coneflower, etc.?
That depends. Some are easier than others. Sometimes you can get a second bloom off Monarda, but typically not. Coneflower, yeah, I mean, that just kind of goes. Rudbeckia, if you cut it back, it should develop more. A lot of shrubs are that way too, like spirea. If you shear it back, it'll bloom, and shear it back, it'll bloom. What else? There are. I'll have to kind of work on a list of things that that would touch, because yes, there are. Coreopsis is one of them too. Tick seed. You can do that several times throughout the season and it rebloom. Salvia as well.
Another question. Milkweed. I planted 3 a couple of months ago. Currently being munched by monarch caterpillars. Will the plants survive, or will I need to replant next year? Again, they're relatively new, so not huge.
Oh yeah, they'll survive. They have a really hardy root system, and it's not like the monarch caterpillar. Typically, it's not like an infestation of them on your plant. It's usually like this. It's like 1 or 2 or 5. So they're gonna eat, the leaves off the plant, but they're not gonna destroy its healthy root system.
All right. And when is the best time to cut back peonies?
Just whenever. Like, typically I'll cut mine back when we've had that first frost and those stalks die, but up until then I would let it, similar to what you hear about daffodils or daylilies, like even though after they've stopped blooming, they're still pulling in nutrients into their root system. So you want to let them kind of continue that process and let that material that's above ground die naturally. That could be hard to do because by this time they look really ugly. But I would just let them go until we get our first frost.
I'm not seeing any more questions. We can give it a second. Have you seen any difference between cultivars and the native variant regarding pollinators?
That is a big subject that I was scared to touch on. I like nativars. I think it's better to use those than nothing at all, or something invasive, or something that's not going to really offer much to our pollinators. I know there is a difference between just the straight species plant and a cultivar. So I guess what I would say is, if you could get the straight species, that's the problem. Is that even our vendors are just growing cultivars or nativars. So getting the straight species is difficult, but we try to when we can. Like this Vernonia is straight species, Asclepias is straight species. So it is better. So as much as you can incorporate that into your landscape, that's good. But also keep in mind, typically some of those straight species tend to reseed. So like the Asclepias, the common milkweed, that reseeds like crazy and will take over your garden bed. It's rare that you see them grown in a nursery situation, because not only is it a nuisance in your garden bed, it's a nuisance in nursery pots as well.
All right, we have a few more questions.
Okay, good. I like questions.
We have many tall oak trees on our property that lose a lot of leaves in the fall. You say to put leaves on the beds, but aren't oak leaves too acidic for the beds? Should we put the leaves on the beds still, or remove them and dispose of them? Also, what do you do with mulch if you put leaves on the beds?
Mulch it depends on what kind of mulch you use. I try not to actually use mulch. It's hard, and I never actually have enough time during the year to do it, but I ideally would like to do it. Oak, yeah, you're right. Oak leaves are a little bit different. But that's if they're old established oak trees, before people started cultivating that ground, they were decomposing into the soil. So that soil might be a little bit more acidic. And with oak trees and a lot of those other sycamores, you almost need to get a leaf mulcher, because you need to help that process along of decomposing, or else it takes them forever to decompose. I'm just speaking more so for maple. Maple leaves are easy, and hackberries, elms. But yeah, that's a difficult. Oaks are a little harder to deal with.
Do azaleas offer anything to pollinators?
Somewhat. I don't really see them hang out around them too often. Native azaleas, yes. The deciduous ones. Because they bloom early in the season when the bees are looking out trying to find something that's blooming, and they are. But as far as the encores, yeah, I mean, the bees will hang out around there, but not a whole lot.
When is the best time to plant bulbs for the spring?
We're getting into now. Just got some in here at the nursery. This is the beginning of the time. You don't really want to go past November to get those bulbs in, because you want them to get in, start with the soil still being warm. So yeah, now's the perfect time, up until November.
We'll give it a second. See if anyone. Someone is asking about hostas. They may have missed you mentioning hostas. I have quite a bit of shade in my yard and looking for full shade options.
Sure. Yeah, hosta is one of them, because they're kind of bred, or what I've noticed is they have different bloom times. I can't really tell you what species they're bred with that makes them bloom later. I can just tell you which ones do. This one is Designer Genes, and it's a later bloomer. Island Breeze is another one that just started to bloom in our Volcano Island. So usually the island ones bloom later. So hosta is really good. The hardy plumbago is another good one for shade. Turtlehead is another late season bloomer. And then spring bloomers, you have a ton of options in the shade. The struggle is the blooms in the fall for shade material.
Gorgeous hosta. Do you suggest growing milkweed from seed?
It's hard. It's easier just to get the plant. If you do need a whole lot in the spring, for us, we bring in 4-inch containers of Asclepias tuberosa, Asclepias incarnata. That's actually where these two plants came from. And then there was a cultivar, gay butterflies, that we got brought in a small container. But you can do it from seed. It's just difficult.
Someone's asking for help planning a layout for a butterfly garden.
Oh, yeah, that's just, if you'll bring in kind of ideas that you like and pictures of your space, we can always help you with that here at Bates.
And someone's saying, following up on your hosta thing, red and purple stem hostas bloom now.
There you go.
This person has over 700 varieties.
Boom.
Does yucca plant grow from roots or the seeds that fall off the plant?
Typically roots, but I mean, that's how things spread, is through seed. But mainly root. I mean, mainly it's a grove that gets mostly tubers.
And then someone is asking, I love hardy plumbago, but my shade is moist. What can I grow there?
It'll still grow there too. If you got more moisture in your shade, ferns are great. There's a lot of native ferns and non-native ferns. But ferns do really well here. The turtlehead is good for moist shade. A lot. Astilbe. Aruncus is another one, which is also called goat's beard. Yeah, you've got a ton of options. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We talked about fall pollinators, but I really am looking forward to being able to talk about pollinators again in the spring, when it's exciting and all the annuals and fresh perennials come in, and also speaking with you about other perennial topics as well. So thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a good day.